Hello and welcome to this special on the print. I'm Snehesh Alex Philip, the deputy editor here who looks after defense issues. I have with me a very special guest, a guest from Israel. He is Gershon Baskin. He's the Middle East Director for International Communities Organization, which is a UK-based peace building NGO. Now, Mr. Uh, Naturally, since you know that he is from Israel, we are going to talk about the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. And Mr. Baskin has he has played a very important role in the past. In 2011, he was part of the negotiations with the Hamas for the release of an Israeli soldier who was held captive. So, welcome to the Prince, sir. It's a pleasure to have you
Thank you.
here.
Thank you very much.
First of all, to begin with, my sincere condolences to you for what has happened to your fellow citizens, to countrymen over the last weekend, in which several of them were brutally killed and several of them are now in hostage.
Yeah, well, it's not several. It's almost 1,400 people were brutally murdered, and there are 200 Israeli civilians who are hostage now. Women, children, infants, elderly people, and sick people.
Absolutely, I get it. About 1,200, women, children, toddlers, people who were on wheelchairs, and even people who were bedridden were
Yes.
Shot and killed by the Hamas terrorists.
Yes.
So what is the situation right now in Israel as we speak?
Well, the situation is that there is a military operation ongoing with a massive bombing campaign in Gaza, which is aimed at taking out Hamas targets, with a great deal of damage being done to civilian infrastructure as well. Whole neighborhoods are being flattened by Israeli bombs. The public was informed by Israel that they should move south from the north of the Gaza Strip to the south of the Gaza Strip. The main target of the Israeli land incursion, which will begin imminently at any time it could begin, is aimed mainly at Gaza City in the center of Gaza, to track down, locate the hostages who are being held, and to bring down the Hamas government so that it will never rule and never pose a threat to Israel again. The mood in Israel shifted so dramatically. If you remember, just 2 weeks ago, we were in the 40th week of massive public demonstrations against our government, who was trying to pass a judicial revolution to change the whole nature of the Israeli regime. And Israel had never been more divided before between those who support the government and those who are against the government. And after last Saturday, October 7th, Israel is more united than it's been in the last 75 years. The people are united around the government, which has been enlarged and constitutes people with greater responsibility, sitting in the war cabinet making decisions, facing trauma and crisis of a kind that we've never experienced before. Sorry, this is the most serious attack that's ever taken place against the state of Israel and the people of Israel, with more dramatic results of civilian casualties in Israel's 75-year-old history. Some people have compared it to the United States 9/11. For Israel, this is 10 9/11s, not just one 9/11. After 18 years of rule in Gaza by Hamas, Hamas has to face the reality that Israel, which had a slogan for 18 years that we're going to bring down Hamas, is not talking about slogans now. The Israelis are intent and resolved to do it. The only thing that's preventing them from doing it immediately is the hostages being held in Gaza, but that won't prevent the military operation. The military operation will go on, and Israel is trying to engage in negotiations now to release at least the women, the children, the elderly, and the sick, in some kind of negotiated agreement facilitated by the Qatari government, who apparently is trying to negotiate. But it's very convoluted and very complicated. They're not doing what they should be doing. They haven't learned the lessons of how to negotiate with Hamas, in my view. But those negotiations will go on until the window closes. The window closes when the ground invasion begins, and the Israeli army is steaming into Gaza with tanks and artillery and special forces that are tasked to find the hostages.
So, when you mentioned that they have not learned from from the past negotiations with Hamas. So, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that according to what I understand, and I want to caveat that I might be wrong, but from what I understand, what's happening right now is that the government of Qatar is talking to Hamas, and the government of Qatar is then talking to the Americans. The Americans are talking to the Israelis talk back to the Americans, and they go back to the Qataris. And right, it's very convoluted. If the Qataris want to negotiate, they should be talking directly to the Israelis and directly to the Hamas. Bringing the Americans into the picture to be a side in the negotiations led to what happened yesterday with Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, going to Tehran, and then the Iranian foreign ministry issuing a statement on the negotiations. We don't want the Iranians to be a side to the negotiations. What we want from the Americans, I think what we should have from the Americans, are demands made on the Qataris to issue ultimatums to Hamas that if they don't release the hostages, then Hamas's leadership will be expelled from Qatar. That's what the American role should be here now, not aside to these negotiations.
That is something that we can all wish for, but I think that is a bit too high, a wish when it comes to Qatar threatening to expel Hamas leaders on its soil.
I think so as well, but we have to remember that Qatar is an American ally. The United States has an army base in Qatar. The Americans, if they wanted to, could put all kinds of sanctions on Qatar, which would make it very difficult for them in the international community. They suffered greatly when they were boycotted by the GCC nations, when Qatar Airlines couldn't fly anywhere. So there is pressure on Qatar. The same thing could be said for Turkey. Turkey is hosting hundreds of Hamas families and operatives. Turkey is a member of NATO and an ally of the United States. All this needs to be taken into account that we're also looking all the time at the horrendous civilian casualties in Gaza. The Palestinian civilian population of 2.2 million people are not the enemy. They shouldn't be the enemy. And they are suffering the consequences of what Hamas did. Hamas brought the Palestinian cause back 75 years. This the Palestinian people should realize. I know it's difficult for them to realize it when they see their brothers and sisters being bombed by Israel and seeing such a humanitarian catastrophe of more than 3,000 people killed and more than 600,000 people who are homeless now, their homes bombed. It's a catastrophe in Gaza. But they need to blame Hamas for bringing them back to the Nakba, for bringing them back 75 years to the catastrophe that they had in 1948.
Well, there's no doubt about, I completely agree with what you said. Initially, you mentioned that what is stopping the idea from carrying out the ground invasion were the 200 hostages that have been held by Hamas. But you also mentioned that it is not going to stop them. So if the negotiations fail, would the idea still walk in and roll down the streets of Gaza, the lanes of Gaza actually, and put those 200 Israeli and foreigner and American lives in danger?
Yes, they will. I think when I said that they're waiting to begin the operation because of the hostages, it's also that they're collecting a lot of intelligence information. They have hundreds of telephones that were found on the bodies of the terrorists that were killed inside of Israel. Israel also has the technology to enter the telephones, thousands of telephones inside the Gaza Strip, and they are collecting intelligence information, both operational information about the underground city, what the Israelis call the metro, the whole place where the Hamas leadership and fighters are hiding, where roads might be booby-trapped, operational information about their fighting plans, and also potential locations where hostages are being held. And as the massive forces of the Israeli army sweeps into Gaza with the tanks and the artillery and the infantry, there will be special forces going all over Gaza to the locations that they have identified to try and find the hostages and release them in rescue operations.
Okay. So but you're saying they are collecting intelligence about, the fighting capability of the Hamas, where all things, the booby traps that the Hamas would have put out. But you also said that they will go in despite. So it's they're willing to take the collateral damage of 200 hostages.
We already paid the damage of 1,400 Israelis in the terrorist attack that they committed. 270 young people were massacred at a music and dance festival.
Yeah.
This was done in the most brutal way, and this essentially moved Hamas from being a potential partner to long-term ceasefire arrangements into ISIS, into a body that has to be erased from its ability to govern the neighbor of Israel and to continue to threaten the people of Israel.
Okay, fair enough. You also mentioned about the casualties that are happening in Gaza. You've mentioned that the residents of Gaza, are becoming a collateral damage in the bombings that are being carried out by the IDF.
Yeah, I don't like to use the word collateral damage. These are not goods. These are human beings. This is
Absolutely.
a human catastrophe.
This is a human catastrophe in which, while the civilians on the Israeli side have been killed, have been butchered, the same is also happening to the Gazans, the Palestinians who are living in Gaza. Now, the counter argument to the whole thing is that there are children who are getting killed in Gaza. There are women who are getting killed in Gaza. There are children, elderly, who have been maimed. So, where does this whole moral argument come into place?
There isn't a moral argument. Everything that's happening is morally wrong. There's no question about it. But there's no realistic alternative that I see where Israel can allow Hamas to remain in place. I've been negotiating with Hamas for 18 years. Much of the time that I've spoken to Hamas has been focused on how do we reach a long-time modus vivendi? How do we arrive in a relationship where the siege on Gaza can be opened, where Gazans can have a life, where Israel can feel protected and not threatened all the time with rocket fire on its civilian population, which is a war crime. And I believe that we could negotiate that deal. I also understand that no population in the world would agree to live for 18 years under siege like the people of Gaza have. I wrote a month ago in my weekly newspaper column that the situation is bad and going to get worse. I hope that this is a wake-up call for the people of Israel to finally understand that you cannot occupy another people for 56 years and expect to live in hope. You can't keep people in a siege in an open-air prison, 2.2 million people for 18 years, and expect for them to be quiet. But Hamas crossed the red lines. They crossed the lines of humanity. They're a resistant movement, and they have a right to resist occupation in the Israeli siege. They do not have a right to do what they did in Israel, to butcher innocent people in their homes, in their beds, to slaughter young people at a music festival with machine guns and anti-tank missiles and RPGs. That is not resistance. That's barbarism. That's brutality. That's terrorism.
Well, so what, according to you, is the solution? Is the two states solution is that with the Jerusalem enjoying the special status?
I don't know. I don't know what the solution is anymore. Quite frankly, I don't care if it's 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, or 10 states. That's not the primary issue in my mind. The primary issue is that when this war is over, we need to wake up and face each other and say, we are not going to eliminate each other. We are not going to invest our energies, our resources, and our lives on killing each other. We're going to have to sit down together and figure out how to live together, where the basic principle is going to have to be that everyone who lives between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea has the same right to the same rights. That's the bottom line principle. There has to be equality between everyone who lives here. No one has more rights than the other. We have to recognize each other's right to be here. We have to respect each other. We have to honor the individual cultures and identities that we have, both national, ethnic, and religious. Jews, Christians, and Muslims need to recognize that we share the same holy places and we pray to the same God. and we need to figure out politically how we enable each other to exist here, protect our identities and our cultures, and live in peace. And hopefully that will be done by a new generation of Israelis and Palestinians. Our old leaders who have been ruling us for all these years have to go. They have no legitimate right to stay anymore, not in Israel and not in Palestine. We need a new generation with new ideas, new dreams, and new visions, and new leadership.
See, you mentioned about that the generation of politicians need to go on both sides. But within Israel also there is a large, now the operation is on. But there is a sentiment that it was the Israeli government only which supported Hamas to an extent to undervalue the Palestinian Authority. So
it was a dual-pronged strategy to keep an illegitimate Palestinian Authority in power, which was subservient and subcontractor to Israel's security needs, and weakened Hamas in Gaza, so that Mr. Netanyahu can face his people and face the world and say, we have no partner. We want peace, but look at our partners on the other side. They're not partners for peace. Mahmoud Abbas doesn't speak for anyone, and Hamas is dedicated to our destruction. And this was a strategy that worked while Israel continued to build illegal settlements in the occupied territories and to make the life of Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza hell. And the wake-up call has to be that this is not sustainable. We cannot imagine that we can keep another people occupation and expect to have peace. This has to end.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to ThePrint. I agree on the fact that it's a human catastrophe that is unwinding in Gaza right now. But what the Hamas did was also nothing short of absolute terrorism, absolute barbarism. But then now there are people in Gaza who are now being affected, civilians, women, children, elderly. And I hope that there is a solution that is found in the coming days. But yes, Hamas has to go. Thank you so much for speaking to ThePrint, sir.
Thank you.